of evolution, we recognize that something happened. Something happened in our DNA that cannot be explained away with just coincidence.
Remember in the Bible, it says in Genesis chapter 1, let us make man in our own image. Curious, plural terminology.
Right.
Well, the ancients asked, who is God talking to? And the response was he was talking to his angels. And if we understand in our modern terms that these angels might have been extraterrestrials, there you go, right from the Bible. You have a clear, definitive statement of an extraterrestrial development of human DNA.
Absolutely. And DNA holds information, but it's programmable.
DNA is the molecule that defines every living creature on Earth.
DNA is the molecule of life itself with a code. A molecule with a code on it.
The DNA code is essentially like a language consisting of genes that confer particular traits like eye color, hair color, all these traits basically that we recognize.
In a sense, DNA is the program that gets run by the computer, and the computer is the cell. The cell executes the instructions in the DNA molecule in order for organisms to live and develop. And it depends a little bit on the environment and other things that are happening. And that's why, for example, two identical twins, even though they have the same DNA, are not precisely identical.
In 1859, nearly a century before the discovery of DNA, English biologist Charles Darwin theorized in his controversial book On the Origin of Species that every living thing was the product of natural selection, evolving over millions of years to adapt and survive in changing environments. When scientists later discovered DNA and its ability to adapt, it seemed to be in line with Darwin's theory. But today, with a far greater breadth of scientific knowledge, a number of Darwin's assumptions have been found to be incorrect. And one burning question remains. If evolution is the only factor in the development of life on Earth, then why are humans so incredibly unique?
We don't see dolphins building cars. We don't see elephants building houses, But that might sound trite, but it's a fact that these animals just simply haven't progressed and advanced in the way we have. There's something definitely different about the human race, and the big question is, why is that?
Nobody has ever denied that evolution exists because there is a fossil record. However, even Darwin himself in The Origin of Species, in the last chapter he says, I like my theory, but there's something that does not make sense. And this is why we have the so-called missing link. And the ancient astronaut theory suggests that that missing piece is an external artificial mutation of our genetic makeup.
I mean, we know that's possible. Even now, scientists are cutting DNA, isolating the gene that is responsible for this, responsible for that, moving things around.
DNA is essentially digital. It's information, right? But it's programmable. You can cut, copy, paste, and edit it. So after Crick and Watson discovered the double helix nature of DNA, it launches this whole search into molecular biology, bioengineering, and so forth.
In 1953, molecular biologists James D. Watson and Francis Crick made one of the most important scientific breakthroughs in human history when they identified the double helix structure of DNA. The discovery led to a radical new era of genetic experimentation, culminating in a revolutionary method to edit DNA known as CRISPR. Developed in 2012 by scientists Jennifer Doudna and Emmanuel Charpentier, CRISPR, which stands for Clustered Regularly Interspaced Short Palindromic Repeats, is a tool that enables scientists to target and modify individual genes.
CRISPR can be thought of as a kind of a genetic scissors that can snip DNA at a desired location. And what that allows people to do is effectively cut out one sequence and paste in another sequence, just like you might do in a word processor. CRISPR is incredibly powerful because it allows DNA sequences to be altered in desired ways. It could be used to improve crops. It could be used to fight pathogens. It could be used to confer immunity to a disease. And of course, it could be used for other purposes like creating blue eyes from brown eyes or blonde hair from brown hair.
You know, one of the most fascinating things I found about the whole CRISPR scenario and why it's so important too is that we can alter and edit DNA so then it's passed on to future generations. And that is kind of a really dangerous premise.
But that's a very controversial issue today in modern science. And we're doing the work of angels by directing evolution.
While genetic engineering of humans may seem like an issue that won't need to be faced for many years to come, it has, in fact, already happened. In November 2018, Chinese biophysics researcher He Jiankui made the shocking announcement that he used CRISPR on twin female embryos.
And plan to monitor the twins healthy for the next 18 years.
In a bold effort to make the twins immune to HIV, he deleted a single gene known as CCR5. Although the procedure was a success, his unauthorized actions to tamper with human biology on such an audacious scale led Chinese authorities to incarcerate him for a 3-year prison sentence.
We just don't know enough about the long-term effects of gene editing to be performing those types of procedures on humans at this point.
As far as these experiments are concerned, what they demonstrated was that scientists now had the ability to quite literally play God.
Further research published in the journal Cell showed that the removal of gene CCR5 also significantly improves memory, cognition, and even the brain's ability to repair itself after a stroke. These developments, as ethically complicated as they are, prove that DNA can in fact be altered to advance the evolution of human beings.
The way that I'm looking at this is this whole CRISPR technology is simply a rediscovery of technology that existed way before and has been used here on planet Earth. Perhaps, of course, not by human beings. You know, this is something that Erich von Däniken has proposed in Chariots of the Gods over 50 years ago, that the ultimate proof of an extraterrestrial intervention will not be found in a crashed spaceship somewhere or a ray gun that's discovered in a cave, but rather in our DNA.
Just recently in 2018, this Australian geneticist discovered these DNA knots, which they call the eye motif. And they think that this is perhaps what's creating the modern human.
So one has to ask the question, who did that?
Actually, in 2018, this Australian geneticist discovered these knots in our DNA. And some of the doctors think that this is perhaps what's creating the modern human. This is the major discovery that they've made, that our DNA doesn't necessarily look like a double helix all the time. It can take on different expressions, and this one is like really sticking out. But these knots have been there from the very beginning of our DNA.
Yes.
And I'm going to predict that they have a very significant role to play in our evolutionary future.
I wouldn't be surprised if they find that, because again, they are...
We don't believe anything is a coincidence.
Right.
In April 2018, Dr. Daniel Christ at the Garvan Institute of Medical Research in Sydney, Australia, announced that he had discovered a curious anomaly in human DNA. Dr. Christ and his team identified sections of the double helix genetic structure that are twisted into what they described as knots. While the function of these knots remains largely a mystery, scientists suspect these unusual DNA shapes may play an essential role in human evolution.
We don't exactly know the function, but presumably because it's changing the shape of the DNA, One of the proposed ideas, right, is that they may be involved in gene regulation.
We've known for more than 50 years that the way genes are turned on and off, the way they're regulated, is at least as important as what the genes actually do once they're turned on.
Is it possible, as ancient astronaut theorists propose, that these mysterious DNA knots not only played an important role in the evolution of humankind, but are physical evidence that extraterrestrials manipulated human DNA?
There are these parts inside our DNA that do not correspond to that double helix structure. How crazy is that? Because through science, we've learned that it seems as if those parts were somehow extraordinary from the rest of the structure.
It's almost like added information. I think the common denominator of this whole discussion is that DNA is changeable, it's malleable.
More and more question marks arise because we now have evidence that some of the things that happen with our own human DNA are not coincidental. So one has to ask the question, what was the purpose of it and who did that? And of course, the ancient astronaut theory suggests that this was done through a targeted manipulation of our genes by artificial means.
This goes into the old Kabbalistic beliefs about the pre-Adamic civilizations, that we had a humanoid civilization, and then along came God, the angels, and made Adam out of that which was before him.
According to an ancient Jewish interpretation of the Bible, known as the Kabbalah, Adam was created from a human-like race that already existed on Earth. There are some who believe this points to the genetic engineering of Homo sapiens, and that further manipulation of human DNA can be found in the biblical story of the Garden of Eden.
Let's look then at the story of the Garden of Eden and Adam and Eve, living sort of blissfully in this Edenic garden, and then suddenly this serpent being comes to them and offers them some special food to eat.
Who is this serpent? Ancient legend tells us that the serpent in the Garden of Eden was actually a humanoid form. It stood erect, had arms, had legs, clearly it spoke. The serpent talks to Eve and says, hey, have a piece of fruit. Eve eats, Adam too.
And suddenly they completely change into what we would call modern people, who are now creating clothing, creating ornaments. They're building houses and vehicles, tools and things like that. We have, in a sense, an evolutionary leap from primitive humans to more modern humans who are more aware of themselves and their surroundings.
According to ancient astronaut theorists, strikingly similar creation myths exist in ancient cultures around the world. For instance, Mayan tradition describes how humans were created by a feathered serpent known as Kukulkan. And ancient Chinese stories portray the first emperor, Huang Di, as the offspring of a human woman and a dragon god who descended from the sky. But perhaps most remarkable of all is the creation story of the Sumerians, who are believed by most mainstream archaeologists to be the earliest human civilization on Earth. Approximately 4,000 years ago, the Sumerians recorded stories about powerful beings called the Anunnaki, who descended to Earth from the sky. One of these figures was known as Enki. And according to author Zechariah Sitchin, who spent years studying the Sumerian Cuneiform